All right, we can call planning commission to order. I may have to use this.
Yep.
It's 7:15. Sunny, you want to call the roll?
Chair Holmquist.
Here.
Alder Moore.
Here.
Mr. Dorschel.
Here.
Ms. Fox. Here. Mr. Ganser.
Here.
Mr. Stein.
Here.
Ms. Thomas. Here. Mr. Homburg.
Here. All right, item 3 is approval of the minutes from February 26, 2018. Is there a motion?
Move approval. Second.
All right, any edits?
Here in town.
All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, minutes have been passed. Is there anybody that wishes to appear on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, we can close the appearance section, move on to 5A, which is a public hearing on the request for a zoning permit, site plan, and building elevations for approximately a 17,000 square foot clinic and office building for Madison Veterinarian Clinic at 2704 Royal Avenue. It's case number 2004-2018. And who do we have? All right. Alder Homburg has abstained from this item.
Not an alder.
Oh, yeah. Soon to be, someday. Maybe. Who's here to present for us on Madison? All right. So this first part is the public hearing. So if you can give us just a brief overview. Yep. So maybe a brief overview, and we'll ask for any clarifying questions, then we can close that item and move on to item B, which is the consideration for action.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Dan Bertler, owner of Sediment Structures. We're the general contractor on the project, and I'm with Bill Montevello. I got it right tonight. The current architect with the project. Everyone saw the renderings, and the last time we were in for conceptual, we went back and thought about it, and we did some modifications. We added a couple more different architectural features, so it wasn't one big long wall. Add a couple different components, and what you're seeing is actually called Nietzsche wood on it, and it's pretty high-end, top-of-the-line stuff, and I know the owner's going to look at me and say, what's that cost? But, and then we also are looking at either the Nietzsche board siding, which is also a cement board type clip system siding, and then we also added a stone to the bottom of it. And you probably saw the stone prior going down Monona Drive, as well as a Quick Trip, very similar type product. We just thought the stone and a couple other features on this broke up the building enough architecturally where it kind of matches next door in the environment. Bill can talk specifically about the project in general, and that's about all I have right now.
Yeah, as Dan said, we're looking for a less institutional, more kind of user-friendly, attractive look. We bumped the building up and out a little bit at the northeast corner, and then at the entrance also bumping it up, adding a lot of glass to the reception area. And then we also added a drive-up sheltered canopy, so people can, since it's going to be a 24/7 operation, people can drop the animals off and pick them up under a sheltered canopy.
All right. Any clarifying questions? All right. Seeing none, we can close the public hearing section and move on to 5B, which is consideration of action on a request for zoning permit, site plan, and building elevations for approximately 17,000 square foot clinic and office building for Madison Veterinarian Clinic at 2704 Royal Avenue. Case number 2004-2018. Sonny, would you mind?
Sure. This was last reviewed on February 12th in a pre-hearing conference. At that time, there weren't a lot of specific comments or requests for revisions from the commission. The general consensus was that the land use was appropriate for the area. Approval is recommended as outlined in the staff report. There are 14 conditions of approval. I can address any questions on them specifically. Otherwise, about half of them pertain to stormwater. The rest are pretty standard, and we do have Darren Pope here today, the city's consulting engineer from Veerbeker. and he can go through the major points in his stormwater review letter and help us understand those plans.
And Sunny, can you clarify the conditions and Darren's review? Has he seen the conditions after his review letter?
Yes, I sent Darren the staff report, and these are consistent with the recommendations that were in his letter that was included in the packet. So I included number 8, the letter that responds to each of the comments in his letter. Number 9, revised plans that does the same. Number 10 is standard, a revised stormwater management plan. 11, the stormwater maintenance agreement, and 12 is all of these final erosion control stormwater management permits, and that recorded agreement, just clarifying that those are required prior to building permits. But all of the details Darren can go through.
All right. Questions?
Should we hear Darren's review?
We can get to his review if you want to start there. Or we can go through general impressions and then get to the stormwater, because that's the bulk. I'm not sure if there's other questions.
No, I looked at the landscape comments, we're 10 points short on the landscape, site plan, a couple odds and ends stuff. The one item we did not get an opportunity to get together is site lighting photometric. It's something called spring break these days. Everyone appears to be gone. But photometrics would be something that we obviously would work with staff to make sure that the lighting is proper. And if, I also have Chris Homberg here, obviously, it's not sitting there right now, but if we have any storm or site-specific issues, maybe Chris can answer some of those questions on our behalf tonight.
Besides stormwater, because as soon as we get into that, we'll never get out of it. Is there any other questions that people have regarding either site plan, layout, landscaping, lighting, the design based on feedback that this group had? Any other items that we have questions on or concerns before we jump into stormwater?
I'll just add, I like the design. I drove by and I kind of agree that it goes better with the existing building. And it kind of lines up better in terms of style. There were questions about the screening for the MRI van and.
I can talk about that real quick.
Okay.
Almost all the screening will be done again, whether or not it's a combination of stone and or niche or
Okay.
the niche siding panel. The only exclusion would be in the front gates for the MRI trailer.
Mhm.
That'd be a steel frame gate with some sort of screening weaved in.
Right.
Just because they're gates and
Right.
not too heavy. But everything else would be matching the suitable materials that are on the building.
Okay.
I have a couple comments on the landscape plan. As long as you're gonna add a couple of things. There's 5 plants on the east side of the building. Kodiak orange, I don't know what those are. Oh, Kodiak orange Dyer Villa. Okay, sorry, I saw them there. The general comment was the island plantings with the trees. You have a lot of ivory silk dogwood and ironwood. And I think a larger canopy tree, I mean, it's more of an ornamental tree.
Okay.
I think going to a larger canopy shade tree would do a lot more for the site and offering shade and just scale, I think it would be.
And where's that exactly? I'm sorry. Right in the center?
In the
Okay,
islands,
in the
you have a
islands
couple of
themselves.
hackberries, and then you have the ivory
Okay.
silk lilac tree. In general, I don't think those do very good in this sort of situation.
Okay.
But I think it should be a larger species too, and also the ironwood is a smaller tree
Okay.
as well.
All right. Other questions or comments?
No, I'm good with that.
All right, I guess we'll move on to stormwater, our favorite thing. Darren, do you mind walking us through and hitting some of the highlights in your report?
Sure. We can get the projector to work here.
think they're working on it.
They got it up on their screen.
Okay.
No, sorry.
There it is.
You gotta zoom in.
Generally, it's gonna be okay.
Where you want it?
If it could
Focus
zoom in.
on how you go. You sit by it.
Zoom in up on this end.
There.
That much better.
I do have a few more comments other than just stormwater on the site as well. And those are pretty minor, but I just wanted to point them out. The first one has to do with the grading in the parking lots. And the area where the handicap stalls are, those are shaded in yellow there. Typically what we like to do is to have some spot elevations on the ends of the stalls, so that there's a more general idea of how those stalls are going to be laid out. And per ADA requirements, they can't exceed more than a 2% slope in any direction. And if you just use the spot grades that are at the face of the walk in the other end of the parking lot, they're taking the slope of the parking lot going from the high side here down this way. Those slopes are around 3%, 3.5%, somewhere in there. So just so that those stalls aren't that steep, I'd recommend that they have some spot grades at the ends of the stalls to make sure that that 2% is maintained in the area for the parking stalls. There's also, I guess, another area that I was a little bit confused about in the plans was that there is an existing driveway open up here, and then this area in yellow here, they had called out for grass pavers. And I understand that they're going to be parking a MRI truck in this area here, but I'm not, and then this appears as a gate there. But then on the site layout plans, they call for the curb opening that's there right now to be removed and regular curb head put there. So I don't know if you can answer how that, to me, it almost seemed like you had the grass pavers there because you wanted the vehicle to go through that opening, but then you put regular curb there. So I was a little confused about the intent of that area.
Yep. Basically, the MRI trailers are on a lease, and sometimes they're leased for a year, a couple, 2 years. More importantly, the MRI trailers, technology-wise, keeps getting updated. So what happens is maybe once a year or once every 2 years, that MRI trailer will have to leave the site and be replaced. Everything is on the passenger side. So we can't get the trailer in from the other side, and that's why those gates are there. So we would back the trailer up on those pavers and then shut the gates. Does that make sense? So it's not once a year, we'd just go over that curb line, go over the stone pavers, and the pavers have the grass coming through. We thought that architecturally might work, but that's the reason behind it.
Okay, so the access to get the trailer in and out of the site would be from Royal Avenue there?
Correct.
And not through the parking lot?
Not through the parking lot, correct.
Okay. So would maybe a mountable curb
Sure.
be a better option there to get the trailer over there, rather than having a straight 6-inch curb height that you have
Sure.
to try to get
Like I said,
a
it's
trailer?
once
And
or
then
twice
you're going to
a
have to
year.
turn too to
We're gonna have
maneuver
to
to
turn
get
to
that.
in. Yep.
So I think a straight curb head is going to be, probably give you some difficulties in doing that.
We could do a mountable.
Okay.
I don't see any reason with that.
Yeah, after we saw your comment, we talked about it internally, we said we probably do a multiple. We have wedges we can put in curb lines from. I think a multiple is a good idea. The reason we didn't want that opening there is we don't want people to come in there and park there thinking they can get their car in there. Because if there's a curb cut there all year long, we'll have problems with
Right.
people thinking they can turn in there.
Thanks.
There's also a couple of areas in this corner. In terms of the site grading, over in this area where we're doing some site grading here, the contours are very close there. So that's at a 3-to-1 slope, and we usually recommend that a maximum of 4-to-1 is used in order to be able to maintain that grass area by mowing. It starts to get more difficult when you get to a steeper slope than a 3-to-1. So that was something else that we wanted to point out. In terms of the utilities, the Public Works Department had pointed out that the connections should be made to Mangrove Lane and not Royal Avenue, so the plans will have to be modified for that. And then in the city's ordinance also requires that all portions of the building be within 300 feet of a fire hydrant. And looking at the existing hydrants that are on the site, or around the site there, it appears that all areas of the building will be within 300 feet of a public hydrant. And then, I guess then, jumping into the stormwater, they're proposing to, the first, I guess, thing that we need to look at for stormwater is the sediment control. So the city's ordinance requires that the total suspended solids be reduced by 40%. And you do an evaluation where you look at the site without any of the proposed stormwater management facilities and then with the stormwater management facilities. And so they're proposing to have the south parking lot sheet flow towards the south and then into a drainage swale with a rock crib here and then come into a wet pond. And then this parking lot here, the sheet flow to the east and then south through a pipe that's underneath the driveway and into a wet pond here. So this pond here is going to provide the treatment for the site. And we noticed that the slopes around the wet pond are at a 3-to-1 slope. And again, we'd recommend that they be 4-to-1 for maintenance purposes. And then also the intent of the, and it's actually said right in the city stormwater ordinance, is to provide standards that are conform to what the county standards are. And so the county has a design manual for different stormwater management features. And for wet ponds, they too have a requirement that the maximum slope of the wet pond would be a 4-to-1. They also have requirements that there's what's called a safety slope that's below the water surface. So that's at a shallower slope, a 10-to-1 slope, and that it's 10 foot wide. That would be if anybody would fall down the steeper slope, they would have a chance to regain their footing before they would totally get into the deeper part of the pond. And so, again, the county has requirements in their standard that be a 10-foot wide shelf. These plans have it as an 8-foot shelf. So those are two of the requirements, or two of the things about the pond that we are recommending that they change for moving forward. They do get a 67% total suspended solids removal from the current design. So there is room to, if you increase the slopes, you're going to, in the given area, you're going to reduce the amount of wet area that they have, and the efficiencies of removal will be reduced. But they have room to work within that, in that they're at 67%. They only need to get down to 40%. So we're recommending that they modify that to comply with the county's standards for that. There are a few other, I guess, so they, I guess at this point, what I'd recommend that they do is, I've had some correspondence with Rob Remacher at Hamburg about it. He's concerned about the space that going to 4-to-1 slopes would require. I did notice that they have more parking stalls. They're at 73, and the ordinance requires 56. So there's the possibility that they could lose a stall or two near the pond to get the area that they need. Also, some of the dry pond area, that could be worked into a wet pond area. So that could also provide some more wet area for the pond. And then if that doesn't work, just to the south at Farrell Equipment Supply, they used underground detention there to achieve their stormwater requirements. So at this point, I guess where things are at with that, with Hamburg, I've asked that they at least do a preliminary layout for a pond that has 4-to-1 slopes, and then run it through the stormwater model to see what sort of sediment removal they get out of that design. And if they can achieve that removal, then it makes sense to go forward, I think, with a pond design that complies with the county requirements. And then we had similar comments of the dry detention basin that has 3-to-1 slopes, and we're recommending 4-to-1 slopes to comply with the county requirements for dry basins. There's a few, in the other part of the ordinance that needs to be met is for oil and grease, and they're achieving that using clear stone trenches, and that's acceptable practice. Runoff rate control is another requirement, that they have to not allow any more runoff from the site than what was in the before redevelopment. And there's some error messages that we're seeing in the modeling that they did. And I think if they make some tweaks to the model, adjust some settings, that they can overcome that. And then for infiltration, they're required to just direct impervious areas to pervious areas to allow some natural infiltration to happen. And they're achieving that by using the dry pond area and then the rock trenches. So I think that covers. There are other minor comments, and if you have any questions about what I've just said or any of the other minor comments in my letter, I can answer your questions at this point.
Dan?
No. My only question is, do you guys have any problems with their recommendations with the plan, the changes?
Yes, we do,
So you're gonna tell us what those are?
if I could.
That'd be great. Jared, don't go too far.
Okay. First, my apologies. Rob Remacher from our office is a design engineer on this, and he has young kids since spring break, so he's on vacation. Mike Hackle from our office oversees this project. He has small kids. He's on spring break. So you're stuck with me.
We should have had this meeting at Disney. And everybody could have been there.
Absolutely. Then you've probably been stuck. I probably wanted to be there. So here's the deal. Lots of great comments. We agree on almost the majority of this, but you're prophetic. This is going to take me a few minutes to go through this because it's water quality, right? So I want to give you a little background on where I'm coming from. So there are things called technical standards. A lot of people refer to them as DNR standards. They're not just DNR standards. They're developed by Standards Oversight Council, which is a collaboration between the DNR, NCRS, DOT, I think Army Corps is in that. There's 7 entities. So anyhow, these entities are all experts in this field, and it's all about preserving our natural resources, right? In this case, we're talking about water quality. They get together with their technical experts, and they craft these things called technical standards. Somebody has to be the custodian of those. And in the case of our water quality standards, the DNR is the custodian. So for short speak, a lot of people say, well, DNR standards. Well, yeah, no. So these are what are called technical standards, and all design is usually predicated on that. I've served on a number of these committees to develop these standards, and I will tell you the DNR's standpoint is, and they make it very clear, the team leader's always been from the DNR on these because they're the custodian, that these aren't ordinance. We don't create ordinance. What these are suggestions that help you design your project so you have the best chance to succeed. And they gather technical experts from around the state in different fields to say what would be the best design to make this succeed. And then they publish technical standards. Now you have to jump through a lot of hoops and fire to not follow a technical standard, because you don't have to, as far as the DNR is concerned, but you have to meet their water quality standards. You have to meet their erosion standards and so forth. So that's how a technical standard is developed. Now, in Dane County, we have to follow a technical standard because the county is the one that enforces it for the DNR water quality standards, and the county, Dane County, has chosen to adopt the technical standards as the force of ordinance. So anywhere you are in Dane County, you have to in effect have something as good or better than the technical standards, and they have adopted them, so they're like the force of law, a technical standard in Dane County. So I'm trying to set this up. Now, Dane County, in addition to adopting technical standards, has created a design manual to aid designers, engineers, everybody in creating these things and the best chance they think to succeed. Now, the design manual is not a requirement. It's a recommendation. And they have it, and they usually enhance the technical standards in their design manual. In the case of what we're talking about tonight, it's wet ponds. So what the technical standard says is you need what we have shown here, a 3-to-1 side slope and an 8-foot safety shelf. What the Dane County Design Manual asks for is a little wider safety shelf and a little softer slopes. And there's some reasons why they did that. I've talked to Jeremy, said, why do you want a 10-foot safety shelf? So it's not just for falling in, it's if an animal or a person got in that pond, you want to be able to get to that edge and have this safety shelf there that you can just climb up onto and stand up, and you're not in deep water. Not that this is a deep pond, but that's what it's for. 8 feet, the technical standard says is more than enough. I asked Jeremy why they went to 10 feet. And his answer was, we have a lot of really big ponds, detention ponds in Dane County. And what we've seen on a lot of them, we've actually had wave action. They're so big across, and we've had erosion of the safety shelf. And he said, so we feel with a bigger safety shelf on these larger ponds, it gets to the point where we like to have a little more because we know we're going to lose a little bit. So I'll direct you to our safety shelf. If this is the pond, our safety shelf currently is from here to here. And this is the portion of the deep pond. So if you look at the areas, I calculated it, it's over half again as much safety shelf as we actually have a deep pond. The way this pond is right now, anywhere in this pond, you aren't more than 9 feet from a safety shelf. And as small as this pond is, remember, this whole site, this is the pond. We're not anticipating wave action here. We're not anticipating a lot of erosion. You could argue it could slough in eventually, but again, remember this safety shelf is 1.5 times of the deep pond. There's not enough room for the whole thing to erode into that pond. It would be filled up before the thing would erode. So we don't feel a 10-foot safety shelf is necessary. Second point was the side slopes. Again, a 3-to-1 side slope, most people consider maintainable, mowable. Those of you that have served with me here a long time know I'm a big fan of 4-to-1s. I completely support that. I support 4-to-1s wherever we can. They're easier to mow, they're softer, they're nicer, they don't erode as much. In this case, again, we have to look at what we're talking about. Our side slopes go from 2 feet on this side to about 3 feet on that side. We average about 2.5-foot bank. A 2.5-foot bank is what you're sitting at. You're sitting at a 30-inch desk. So what we're talking about is from here down to the safety shelf. Is it a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1? Another reason they recommend, the reason this is recommended, a minimum of a 3-to-1 is so if you're in there, you can climb back out. Now, if you have a 10-foot bank, a 15-foot bank at a 3-to-1, that's quite a climb. And that's again why the county went, well, we'd like to see 4-to-1s where we can. It's easier to get back out. It's easier to maintain. At my advanced age, I can mow a 3-to-1 when it's only 6 foot long or 7 foot long. If it were a 20-foot bank, it would be a lot tougher for me. So again, the reason that the county recommends going higher where you can is for maintaining it and a long climb out. We don't have either one of those issues here. So here's what I'm getting at. These are all good recommendations. We're not at odds on this. This is not confrontational whatsoever. We have a different opinion, okay? And here's where I'm going with that. When we did our water quality calculations, and I just found this out. I apologize. Rob was handling this. I found out about this issue on Friday night, late. And I met with him Saturday morning. We went over the whole thing, so I had some ability to talk about it intelligently. And I talked to him about achieving 40%. We can achieve 40% and do all the things he's asking for. When we ran the numbers on wind slam, according to Rob, he just took into account these areas. He didn't even take into account this rock swale. That's what he told me. And I know you've run the wind slam numbers. That's probably accurate.
I looked at the model,
Yeah, that's what he told me.
It wasn't in there.
You clearly have water quality benefits in here. Now, again, wind slam says 67%. Those that really know what we're doing, the program, the assumptions, yeah, it's 65, 70% cleaning. Nobody can sit here and tell you it's 67%. But what I'm going to say is there are additional areas here. So it certainly wouldn't be a push to say there's 70 to 80% cleaning the way it's set up right now on the site. It's almost approaching what a green site. If you went on a farm field, we're getting virtually the cleaning you'd have of the water that's required there. So to reach 40%, I have no question we could do it. The philosophical difference is, do we really need 10-foot wide safety shelves down here and 4-to-1 slopes on this small pond? I can put those in, and I can still hit 40%. For me, standing here, I would rather have the water quality. If I can give you twice as clean a water coming off this site, leaving the design that meets the state's the technical standards, wouldn't you rather have cleaner water than be talking about a 10-foot wide safety shelf? Because we go to 10-foot wide safety shelf and 4-to-1 side slopes, literally the top of this gets to be 9 foot wide. We'll have 20 feet of safety shelf protecting a 9-foot wide opening. Think about that. That seems a bit excessive to me.
I have a question, Chris. Do I understand that in the county standards, they don't make differentiation between a very large, big, huge pond and a little pond?
Sure they do. When they approve it, they look at that. And those are the factors you take in. You can't dictate every single situation in an ordinance or in a design manual. So there's a lot of generalizations, and that's you talk about it. I wish I could have had time to talk to Darren about this, but I found out about it, like I say, we talked about it Saturday. As you know, I had an extra meeting before this one, and the date kind of got away from me, and I lost all my time. So I'm here tonight talking about it.
Okay.
So for me, again, to have 20 feet of safety shelf surrounding 9 foot of deep pond, and to have a 4-to-1 slope that's only this tall, or to have virtually twice as clean a water, well, you know what choice I would make. And that's why I'm here, because we did speak with Dane County. I think you were copying on the email, and Sonia, you were copying on it.
Mm-hmm.
They would accept this if they were reviewing it, but they will support municipal staff. So if you want to require that, they would support that. But they would also do it the other way. So Darren did the right thing. He's our technical expert. It's up to him to let the commission know all the things that might pertain to this project. He did absolutely what he has to do. But at this point, the body that decides it is sitting right there. So it's a decision for you. You have the recommendations, and you have our rationale for why we would leave it this way. This isn't a monetary issue. This is going to make no difference on the price of doing this job. How we grade this pond, as long as we grade it right the first time, it's peanuts in the scheme of things. So we're not talking about money. All I'm talking about is water quality. We have an ownership group here that is great to work for. They want to put in a really good project into Monona. They've got a great design. They've got a beautiful building. We've got a brownfield here that's being turned into a gorgeous place. They're exceeding what we have regulations almost everywhere, and this is another area where we have a chance to do better. We can be better. We can be better than 40%. We can have virtually almost 80% cleaning of the water. At the end of the day, I mean, isn't that what we really want, unless you feel that this is a dangerous situation?
Questions, Susan?
Could you get that same impact on the water if you moved that in?
Absolutely, and that's a good
You'd lose a
question.
couple parking.
Yep, that's a good question, and we don't want to do that, and we're not going to do that, because if you look, we've already had to move this over a little bit. It doesn't line up with this one. You remember how we always like to have roads lined up when you have your traffic coming to and fro? Well, we've already moved it over a little bit. If we take it a parking stall, we could lose 2 parking stalls, gain that 9 feet. But if we move it over more, now not only do we have that, but remember, this is an emergency vet clinic. And the one place where people are frantic, not thinking, rushing to save the animal, is when they're pulling in and out of this area right here. And we really don't feel that's in the best interest of safety to be moving this driveway right into the chaos there. And so we really want to avoid that. But yes, otherwise, it's a great question, it's a great observation. We lose 2 stalls, but we feel we're hurting the integrity of the traffic flow in there, and certainly by where that drop-off is. Because I know what it's like. I know when our pet was injured and my wife was frantic. You don't see everything.
So you have you're fine with all of the other recommendations except for the pond?
No, I am, yes, the pond is by far and away the only issue that's of any substance. I have a couple other things I'd like to talk about. They're minor. If I had a chance to talk to Darren on the phone, they'd probably be settled. But the big one for us is the pond.
What are the other things?
They're minor. Most of it's technicalities. 4-to-1, 4-to-1. The 4-to-1s that he talked about in these other areas, that's attainable. It's not a problem. The curb cut is a good catch. I think we thought about it a lot. I think mountable is probably the best way. We can put temporary blocking in there once a year to put it in, but that way Dan doesn't have to call me when he needs to get a trailer in there. If we have mountable, he just get it in, but the mountable will stop the general public from going in there, so I think it solves it. 4-to-1, 4-to-1, keep the current curb open. It's minor, the construction entrance, you mentioned what we have to show DOT type R geotextile fabric. That's an option, it's not a requirement. We prefer not to do it if we have the right soils. When you need to do it is when you have the soils that either your soils will get up into your aggregate or vice versa. We like to use that aggregate back in the project, and to actually put in a construction entrance properly, you have to fluff it all the time. When you have the fabric in there, you tend to catch it and snag on it. So that's actually the technical committee I'm on right now, which is rewriting the construction entrance, but it's a consideration, it's not a criteria. It's just like in the Dane County manual's recommendation or requirement. When you have the technical standard, the considerations are, you should think about this when you're doing your design. The criteria, you shall. And if you look at the technical standard, it's not a requirement, it's a requirement when conditions warrant. So, I mean, I just soon enough put that note on because it's nice solid dirt. I don't want to use fabric. Staking the silt sock. Instead of putting that notation on there, I'll put the notation on we're using Filtrex. Because the Filtrex silt sock doesn't require staking. And it's been tested and approved that way. Most other silt socks, the cheaper ones, are light and they float. And the testing that was done on them, they have to be staked. So I think it's reasonable, but we just have to put the note on which type of silt sock we're using, because that doesn't need staking. One that has to be a head creative is the technical standard asks for 2 soil borings under a wet pond. As I mentioned to Dan, if we do any more borings on this site, there won't be any more dirt left for me to move. This site is a brownfield site. I think you're all aware it was H&H. They had their tanks buried, and it happened to be buried right there, right under where this pond is. They've got closure from the DNR years ago, and there was a bunch of borings done then to get closure. When this ownership group looked at this property, Dan had a whole nother slew of environmental borings done to make sure that we confirmed where it's at. And the good news is there are some low levels of contamination down deep, over 20 foot deep, but those levels are cut in half, I think, on our most recent set of borings. And then there was another set of borings done for the building and for the parking lot. So there's been 3 different times. There's
Like 20 borings.
I bet at least 20 borings on this site. I'm not sure 2 of them fall in this pond, but the reason the technical standard asks for 2 sets of borings is they want to know consistency on soil, which we have 20 borings that show it, but they're looking for if you're infiltrating, they want to know what kind of soil types there are, etc., and they want to know depth to groundwater and depth to bedrock for lining. We have made the decision we will be lining this pond. And we will be putting a 2-foot clay liner in it, unless somebody decides HTPM or HTPE is better, but we will be putting a liner in. The reason for that is because it is a closed site, because there is known contamination, and the known contamination is right under this pond. So if we did another boring, it wouldn't give us any information we don't already, that we need, that we use for anything, because we know we're going to line it. So that's why, and that's, I mean, the technical standard says 2 borings, but there's a reason they want those 2 borings, and we've already brushed right over those because we're going to line it with the 2-foot clay liner. Pool, pond, 4-bay. This isn't much bigger. This isn't. Yeah, I know it's at a value. This isn't much bigger than a 4-bay. And our problem is, you can see how tight the contours are. To put a 4-bay in safely, we undermine all the side slopes. So that's why we can't. And like I say, this is stuff. This other stuff, Kathy, is pretty minor. It's all stuff we can talk about, and that's it. So really the only issue that for us would be this pond. Do you want cleaner water, or do you want bigger safety shelves and softer slopes going into it? The boring, I would guess, be the only other really issue in that. I think we probably all agree.
If you could share the information with the other boards.
Oh, absolutely. We have three different. Oh,
Indicate groundwater.
yeah, we're over 20 feet. Yep. We're over 20 feet, but we still want to line that pond because it's right over where those tanks were. And we just don't want any chance of water getting down and spreading anything. Yep. So that's why. So,
Nancy,
Yeah, well, I just, obviously would like to, since you guys were not able to hash it out in advance of this meeting, Darren, I would love to hear your response to the 3-to-1, 4-to-1 debate, if you will.
On the shelf.
And the shelf, right.
Okay, yeah, first off, I'm not, when I look at these plans, I'm not gonna make a recommendation that goes against the Dane County manual, the standards, because of what the your ordinance says is that you need to provide a set of performance standards that are consistent with the standards set forth by Dane County. And so as a basis for my review, that's where I need to start, is the Dane County standards. So that's the basis for my comments. I think that we can take into consideration the other information that's specific to the site, the size of the pond, that Chris has offered. I'd be willing to I agree with the points that he's brought up for this particular pond.
So there is not some proportionate direction on the shelf? Like, I mean, I get what you're saying, if it's 10 feet, there's like no pond left.
Right,
And I don't understand that their recommendation would not.
In the manual
Be
itself,
relevant to the size.
there's no distinction in the Dane County Stormwater Manual in the wet pond section or the dry pond section of the size of that the requirements change with the size of the pond. There isn't a distinction between a small pond and a large pond in their design manual.
So Darren, do I understand you to say you don't strongly disagree with what Chris said? It's just that your function is to follow what our ordinance says and what the county. Right.
Right.
But what Chris says makes sense.
It does, yeah. I don't refute any of the reasoning that he, it makes sense to me what he's saying.
We're talking about the man of advanced age, right? I mean, I love that new title.
So then the other question comes, there were some other things that Chris raised some concerns about, and I saw you nodding your head this way when Chris said it. So how do we, I mean, it seems to me if they could have talked before the meeting, some of these issues would have been clarified. So how do we get to the point where we, one, can do the pond, go according to what it currently says, but address the other issues that Chris raised that they have, as the petitioner has some questions about? How do we get you guys to sit down and come to, which I think you will. You want to say?
Could I answer?
You can.
It's really easy. The other things I talked about are things we would talk about after you make an approval. I don't think we have any difference of opinion on that. Our difference of opinion on is, do you follow the technical standard, which is ordinance, or do you require us to follow the Dane County manual, which is not ordinance, it's recommendations. And he brought up what it is and that he feels you should design to it. You have an email from the county that says they approve ponds that meet the technical standards. They have done it themselves. It's not like they don't do it. And so it's really, all we're looking for tonight is direction for Darren and I. Would you like to have the pond the way it's designed and cleaner water, or would you like to just adhere to the design manual and just get the 40%? So we need that direction.
Chris, when you talk about the email from Dane County about wet pond design and
Yes.
other ponds have been approved in that direction, was that an email directed to you or in reference to?
It was directed to us in reference to this, and Sonia and Darren are both copied on it.
Okay, so I have an idea of when we get.
I can
Okay.
read you the text of the email if you want.
Sure.
Okay. And this came from Rob Remaker, and he said that, here's Josh Harder, who is the head of the Dane County Stormwater section. Here's Josh's response indicating that he would accept design meeting the tech standard, which is the Dane County tech standard, or the DNR tech standard, but supports whatever the municipality's stance is. So he says, yes, we would typically accept a design consistent with DNR text standard as meeting minimum county requirements, but I support municipal staff that is asking for specific design criteria to be met. That is their discretion for permits that will be issued in their jurisdiction.
Kathy?
Would you like a motion?
I have
Yeah.
another question before there's a motion.
Sure, hang on, hold.
Darren, do you agree that the way it's currently designed, you agree with Chris that the way it's currently designed generates cleaner water?
Yes. Yeah, he shared the model with me, and I ran it myself, and it is showing about 67%.
Missing that
Removal.
whole
Missing
top
that
half.
section.
Right, yeah.
Others before we get to motion? All right, Kathy, go for it.
So I will move approval with the pond as submitted and included in the submittal, and that the balance of the Darren's recommendations be worked out between Darren and Hamburg Engineering, and that Sonia be the overseer of that. And that also the approval includes staff recommendations. Is there anything I forgot?
That last part, the approval for staff recommendation, is that?
That's Sonia's
The
recommendation.
conditions of.
Oh, the conditions. that are
Conditions of
already-
approval?
Is there a second, so then we
I
can
can
talk?
second
All right, so we have a second. A question that I had, one, would people be interested in adding a condition of approval of noting the, and I'm just picking up on all of the items that were talked about. So one was the spot elevations for the ADA stalls, and I can't remember if that was on here or not. The silk sock type being noted. The approval of other soil borings rather than asking for additional soil boring, and the changes in landscape as indicated for a larger canopy shade tree in those islands.
I would include the larger canopy trees. I thought that the, you did not include the parking lot in your recommendations. They had handicap stalls.
That's detailing that
Well, I assume
frankly
it
should have
does.
been on the plan before it was submitted, but we had a deadline, and that's final detailing. He's absolutely right, there'll be detailing that shows it doesn't exceed 2%, and that's something we'll just submit.
On the next revised.
Right, but to Kathy's point, I think what you're saying, Kath, is that your motion was to include all the other things.
Everything
that
else has
Darren had
to be
talked about,
mutually
which included the handicap stalls.
Worked
So-
out, and
right,
Sonia will
right,
be the overseer and
Right.
keep them in line.
So one of the conditions you're saying is to address all of the items laid out in the report, our engineering report.
Right, plus Rob's recommendation around the
Of the
tree.
tree.
Yes.
All right. So it sounds like there's an amendment to add
Plus
in the
Sonia's
landscaping.
recommendation.
I'll just include that as part of the original.
All right. Second, okay with that?
I'm okay with that, yeah.
Other-
So I'm assuming, just to be clear, it includes all his other recommendations, Darren's other recommendations, Rob's tree, and everything that came from Sonia.
Yep.
Yep.
Got it. I'm okay with this.
Others? All right. Seeing no additional questions or concerns, all those in favor as indicated, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
All right, we will move on to 6A, which is a public hearing on a request for a zoning permit for expanded use for the Legacy Martial Arts Studio, currently operating at 5419 Monona Drive, and requesting to expand into the space at 5417 Monona Drive, case number 2009, 2018. Mr. Metcalf.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Metcalf. We're the owner of the property on 5401 Monona Drive through 5419 Monona Drive. And we have a current tenant there, Ken Bent with Legacy Martial Arts. He occupies a 2,000 square foot upper level space. And we have a vacancy below him at that's 4,000 square feet. He's expressed interest in expanding his business to the lower level 4,000 square feet.
It's getting better.
This is good. So we submitted the narrative of our interest in getting that approved, as well as a operation of hours. You may have seen this before when we've been in front of you for different tenants. It includes the tenants in our property as well as the neighboring properties, which is a zero lot line. So the barber shop, the catalog outlet, as well as the pizza oven are all a zero lot line. So those businesses are included in here. And there's also a parking easement that allows us to have overflow parking throughout the shopping center as well. The tenant, Legacy Martial Arts, is about expanding, basically double their space, so they would be expanding their membership. The good thing about this particular use is that the nature of their business is basically drop off and pick up. So we have some other tenants that are in that building that are doing the same thing. The dry cleaner as well as the Chinese restaurant are also just drop off and pick up. So we feel like our parking requirements are in good shape with this particular expansion of this tenant. I did run some brief numbers overall with the Cousins, which is a different calculation, as you know, for restaurants. But we're at a 3-to-1 parking ratio with the Cousins subs on just our own parking stalls. We have 79 parking stalls on that property. So the calculation with the Cousins, the amount of seats that they had came to a 3-to-1 parking ratio throughout the shopping center, which in the past has been a problem because we've had restaurants there and they take up a lot of parking stalls. So I think this is the first time we may have come in front of you with the meeting, I think, parking requirements, which is kind of nice. So with that being said, if you have any questions of myself as the owner of the property or Ken Bent, we'd be happy to answer them. I see in the conditions regarding additional signage, he is going to put a new signage package on the building. Once we approve that, then he can submit that to the city.
Any clarification? If not, we can close 6A and move on to 6B, which is consideration of action. All right, we'll close 6A and move on to 6B, consideration of action on a request for a zoning permit for the expanded use for a Legacy Martial Arts Studio, currently operating at 5419 Manila Drive, and requesting to expand the space at 5417 Manila Drive, case 2009-2018. Sonny.
So the expansion of use requires a zoning permit, so the Plan Commission may review those impacts that could come from expanded classes, expanded clients, expanded hours, etc. So Kevin's done a good job of describing the detail of their parking situation currently and how this may or may not change, and any additional questions can be directed to the applicants.
Questions? Did I say one, Chris? We'll start with Dale.
Kevin, I'm sorry, did you say who was in the space that you're expanding into?
It was the pizza oven. Pizza oven vacated that space and moved to the Village Peddler space.
All right. So it wasn't really a restaurant, it was also kind of the pickup sort of thing, or was there sit-down in there?
There was sit-down. It's essentially the same. They may have actually even expanded slightly when they moved into the Village Peddler space.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, I'm going to say 4 years ago. We've been sitting vacant probably for about that long.
So as he says, parking requirements go down. Sounds good.
Chris?
We all know parking's always been a problem here, which is great news. That means all the businesses are successful. But I noticed you forgot to put one of your heaviest peak time users in here, Princeton Express.
It's down at the bottom.
Where?
Down at the bottom.
Oh, but not with any of the other stuff, with and such. So when Pete Sullivan and Princeton Express are both going strong, there's hardly a spot to be had. Having said that, something has to go in this building.
Well, yeah, I mean.
And I'm not sure I can think of a more benign use for parking, because I believe you have mostly youth, correct?
Yes.
And most of the youth don't drive. So parking's a problem here, it always has been, it always will be, but I can't think of a lot better use that won't really require parking. And the neat part is you've got those extra wide drive aisles, which are above and beyond standards, so if people are coming and dropping off, there's still plenty of room for people to maneuver on by. So I have to mention that parking is an issue, but I think this is one of the best solutions we can have for your, or one of the best solutions you can have and bring to us for your parking issue.
Thank you. I completely agree.
Pardon?
So is that a motion?
I thought you had a question. Move approval with conditions as recommended by staff.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations, guys.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Put it in any of this stuff, you just kind of.
All right, 6C, presentation and discussion regarding
she's so
sign
angry
code
because it's an
updates.
engineer.
I'll talk to my secretary. Thank you. Good luck.
Well, good evening. I'm Mike Slavny from Vanderwall and Associates, and I'm the consultant that was selected to help the commission and the council and the chamber and the steering committee work on a new sign code. And tonight's the kickoff meeting for the project. I'll describe the process that we're using. We'll talk about some project objectives and the Supreme Court decision that is kind of prompting this amendment at this time. And then happy to take any comments or listen to concerns or ideas that you have. The process that we're going to use is going to be primarily focused on a steering committee that you've selected. We'll be bringing the commission back the almost final draft of the code, and then you'll be recommending it to the council at the end for their approval. But in between that time, we're going to be seeking input from the chamber and their members, going to them and hearing what their concerns and ideas are. The sign industry has changed in the last 10 years. There's more technology available. There's more concern about reaching people walking and biking as well as in cars. You've had a tremendous upgrade to your main commercial corridor. I think it looks great. And we've got a sign code that isn't as modern as all of those other things. And there's some clunky aspects to it, having worked for several businesses along the route and organizations who needed signage. And you've got that overlay, but the map was done like with a big thick magic marker. There aren't any lot lines. So I think my first take is the main benefit of the new code will be, it'll be much more user-friendly. We can certainly simplify the administration of the code. We can give applicants a much clearer idea of the rules that are in place, and a much less painful process for people who haven't been through the sign code before. But in terms of the results, and I look at signs not like a normal person because I write sign codes. I'm not sure that the results will be much different. I think the signage looks pretty good in the city. So this may be more of a, kind of an administrative and a legal fix than it really is something that results in noticeable substantive changes to the resulting signs. Any questions about that? Well, let's talk about the project objectives. I think we can remove the overlays from the ordinance. We can deal with regular zoning districts. The zoning pattern lines up pretty well with those overlays. So those overlays are, another level of bureaucracy and kind of another step that you have to go through. And I think at this point they're superfluous. They're workarounds that are going to seem more normal to users, and it result in a more clear understanding of what the rules are. We need to address temporary signs in the right-of-way. That was what the Supreme Court decision in 2015 was about. It was about temporary signs in the right-of-way. Having written 74 of these sign codes, I can tell you that nobody allows signs in the right-of-way, except your signs and those of the state and the federal government, which you probably don't have any here. So that's something we can look at. On the other hand, signs in the right-of-way do serve a purpose, and we need to get at that purpose and figure out a way to address that purpose in the code, rather than just ignore that concern.
Can we comment along the way? We have a lot of signs in the right-of-way. We have a real wide right-of-way on Monona Drive from Broadway all the way to Frost Woods. It's a 120-foot right-of-way. We would have wiped out our businesses if we didn't put parking and signage in it. So all that signage is in the right-of-way.
Thank you for letting me know that. Well, then, it's something I have to rethink and figure out how we address that.
We will all landscape ground signs in the right-of-way.
Because that signage looks normal to me rather than an unusual situation. So thanks for an early heads up about that, Chris. Appreciate that.
That's why Chris is on that group, right?
Yeah, that must have been the reason.
I think you should put him on that group. Okay. Thanks. But the temporary signs then, things like sandwich boards or special event signage, we'll need to think about how to continue what makes sense and how to address any situations that may be causing danger. That's the main concern about signs in the right-of-way is they can block views of little kids or people on bicycles or pedestrians. So we'll take a close look at that and a customized look for you, because usually we just say you can't do that.
Does that include political signs as well?
Yes.
Because I know, again, that's been with the right of way that all of us have, certainly in the residential areas, and I know even when, like, for instance, when the Sustainability Committee wanted to put signs up around, the drains, only rain down the drain signs. There was a big debate in the committee whether or not we could even put them up by the drains because of the code, and because it was a city function as opposed to a private. We agreed that was okay, but again, the political signs have also been an issue.
Yes.
Yeah. And other signs like that.
But when you're talking about if you're talking political signs in residential, people don't even know where their street stops. I mean, and some, like Winnequa Road, I'm not sure if you came up that, but Winnequa Road on the way to Bridge was originally meant to be a boulevard, and some of that right-of-way goes within feet of people's front doors.
Thank you.
People have gardens, they simply don't.
You should be on the subcommittee.
I think I am. So when we're talking they maintain them, they have their gardens. I have my garden, and if you go by my house, I have 8 signs, and they're all in the right-of-way, because if they were pushed back on my property, you couldn't see them because they'd be so far off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 20 feet from, the right-of-way goes, not at my house, but in some of my neighbors, like 20 feet from the street.
And on many other streets, there aren't sidewalks to signal where that right-of-way
Right.
really is.
Not in this city.
Yes.
Kathy, I think that's $100 fine per sign. How many signs you said? 8. Okay.
So who don't you support?
A few people.
That per day?
So One,
able to be.
one of the stupid aspects of that Supreme Court decision is any temporary sign, regardless of its message, has to be treated like any other temporary sign, including temporary political signs. It's a confounding ruling in that regard. So we'll have a lot to talk about in terms of how we really craft this ordinance to meet your needs as well as possible.
Can we distinguish between residential and commercial zoning?
Yes, and you can distinguish, at least according to a more recent federal court decision in California, between commercial and non-commercial speech. But free speech type issues like candidate signs or slow down for kids, we can't distinguish between those, regardless of whether it's a campaign sign or not. So, boy, this stalled out my sign ordinance career for a year and a half, trying to figure out how to contend with this ruling. But now we've got it down, and so.
It's job
I
security.
told you it's a lot more complicated here.
It's a lot more complicated here, right. So the Supreme Court decision basically said, that I think the easiest way to understand it, if your ordinance is set up so in order to know what rules apply, you have to read the sign, then your ordinance is unconstitutional. So it's all about speech. So right now, your code and every other one around the country, identifies things like real estate signs and open house signs and garage sale signs and campaign signs and directional signs, and we can't distinguish. So we now have I think a good model. It's an award-winning model developed here in Dane County. It's been adopted by 4 other cities. So I think we know how to organize the code, and we know how to present it in tabular form. So in your handout, we've got a sample table. That's a big 11 by 17 fold out. And what we've managed to do with the code is we put 98% of the rules on these tables, so you don't have to read 15 pages of text. And we found that makes everybody happy. So we have one table for permanent business signs. We have one table for permanent non-business signs, like street address signs or historic markers or no parking signs. We have one table for temporary business signs and one table for temporary non-business signs. So the typical sign user only has to look at one of those tables, and all of the rules are there. You aren't looking for the lighting requirements on page 17 and the use requirements on page 2. So if I could maybe walk you just through the table to show you how it works. And can we put that up on the?
We can. Can we get the projector, please? And you point, everybody will see it.
Right.
Actually, this thing's upside down. That makes it hard for you.
So let's look at those column headings. We have the first column, that's the sign categories and the sign types. And so, for example, freestanding signs are one sign category. And in the case of this model, there are 3 options for a freestanding sign for any business. You can have a monument sign, a dual post sign, or a pylon sign. Now I notice not many dual post signs or monument sign or pylon signs in Monona, so that may be one thing we need to customize. The second column is
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
We have allowed some pylons along the belt line.
Right.
but not the other districts, can we still distinguish whether it's there or
We-
Winona Drive?
We can do that either by location or by zoning district.
Beautiful.
Whether or not a sign permit is needed. Now, this table being business signs and permanent signs, these things require sign permits, but temporary non-business signs like slow down for kids in a yard sign or just apply pesticides, we wouldn't require a permit for signs like that, and you never have. The number of signs that are allowed. So again, for most business signs, it's going to be one of each one of these big categories. But as we get into those temporary non-business signs, there may be more than one allowed. We just finished a code in Delavan with 7,000 people. And they wanted lots on corners or lots that had more than 200 feet of frontage in business districts to have 2 real estate signs, for example. So we can customize for how large the lot is or whether it's a corner lot, for example. Sign area formula. In some instances, it's a formula based on the size of the wall or the length of the wall or the length of the lot. A lot of business sign rules are set up that way so that there's a kind of harmonious relationship and a consistent relationship between the area of the sign and the area of the wall. And over time, that looks nice. You kind of see the pattern. In the case of temporary signs, again, those sheets of cardboard tend to come in the same size, or sandwich board signs tend to come in the same size. So we may there not have a formula, but rather a standard sign. Size. Sign location requirements, for example, what the setback may need to be, or whether you need to be within so many feet of the drive-through lane to put up your drive-through directional sign. And then we've got a series of tables for the area and height maximums, and that might be based on zoning districts. And in Delavan, they wanted these kind of generic terms like residential, low-key business districts and intensive districts. Usually we just put the zoning district abbreviations in there so we can customize the rules based on which zoning district we are, and in that way give businesses along the Beltline perhaps at Winona Drive bigger side areas than in other parts of the city or on Broadway. And then finally, we have these graphics that provide you kind of a visual definition of what the sign is and where it's placed typically on a business. So that table right there is probably 8 pages of text. It's one of those issues where a picture is worth a lot of words, and we found this to be very helpful. People know they're looking at the right page, and after a while they realize they don't have to look at any other pages. And that minimizes the number of mistakes that are made, makes Sonia's job a lot easier, and you might have fewer last-minute issues come up when you're doing a site plan review here at the Plan Commission. So, in a nutshell, I think we understand that Supreme Court decision, Reed v. Gilbert. Sonia, I know, has provided you with a nice summary of those analyses that were made after that decision. But again, it comes down to if you need to read the sign to figure out what kind of sign it is, your ordinance is probably set up wrong. We've got the 3-committee system plus the council. So you'll be seeing this again when the steering committee's work is done. And you're refining the last remaining issues before you make a recommendation to the Common Council. Are there any questions that you have?
I just want to say that Dale is so excited about this. He's changed his mind about re-upping for reappointment on
So one question I did have that I didn't see on here, and maybe it's part of the, I would have to read the sign to know if it's not. And that has to do with, we have spent time in this group talking about, let's say a strip mall that has a signing package initially kind of put together, and then there's a new business within that district that wants to come in and put a different type of sign than what was already agreed to when they constructed. How would that interface with this?
Well, you get to be part of that decision. That is something there's a choice about. A good number of communities have decided in those multi-tenant situations that the rules that are in place at the time the ordinance is rewritten will be continued. Others have required compliance from adoption date forward, knowing that over a 10 to 20 year period, the signs tend to come into compliance across the board. So that's one of the issues we'll be talking about with all four groups, I imagine. And, I think that's a decision that can be customized to the best needs of the community.
That's not really what you were getting at, Brian, was it?
Similar, but almost the reverse. So, multi-tenant, we said initially it was all going to be red type lettering and the same sign across all of the building.
The format of the sign, yeah.
And then you have a new business that comes in and wants a sign that's completely different color scheme.
Particularly when it's a corporate, and corporate has different.
Those are the ones that have stood out the most.
Green.
Yeah.
Right. So have those been part of your ordinance, or have they been part of the covenants for the multi-tenant structure in most cases?
Part of the covenant, not part of the ordinance.
No, I think it's been part of the ordinance. I can get the language, but it says the Plan Commission may require a comprehensive signage plan
both.
for a building. And then the Plan Commission enforces those standards, so it could be both.
Yes, it could be.
It's up to the good taste of the Plan Commission to make the right decision.
Well, then I'll be interested in learning your perspectives on that issue. Again, I feel that you have latitude under both good sign law and the Supreme Court case to give us some direction on that.
Chris and I have been around long enough that we remember, we used to have pylon signs out at the street, all up and down Monona Drive.
Yeah.
And we forbade those.
It looks like it.
But
That's not easy.
But we didn't do it. I mean, it was, the business, just like we don't have billboard signs along Broadway in Monona.
Right. I'm old enough, I remember what it used to look like. Like two.
But
Is it In and Out? What was the restaurant that had the drive-in? Oh, gosh.
A&W.
No.
Well, In and Out's California.
Yeah, but it had a name like that. Oh, Hungry.
Hungry.
That's in Madison.
That's Madison.
You're in Monona right now.
Oh, is it like?
Curly fries, they had curly
Okay.
French fries.
All righty. So, anyway, I go back.
Other questions or comments? Or eagerness to be on the subcommittee?
I just have a comment. I've talked about, I'd like it if additional times back to the Plan Commission. There's three of us that are on the subcommittee. We'll have lots of time to talk about it, but if any of the other Plan Commissioners have concerns or things that you think are really important about our signage code, we've always had the 5-foot-high landscape ground signs. We gotta things like that as a commission we should talk about. And if there's direction from the people that aren't on that subcommittee, this would be a great time to say, hey, I think this is important about our sign code, or I think we should do something else.
Or as you're going down the drive and you see something, send a message to Sonia or so that we take a look at it.
In case it sparks memory or anything that anybody wants to talk about, I made a short list of some of the issues
That's
that
not a
I
short
see. I'll go through them very quickly.
Is it as bad as water quality?
Yeah, it's worse. There might be some interest in allowing sandwich board signs. Currently, all of those portable type signs are prohibited in commercial districts, but there might be some interest in allowing a sandwich board with certain materials that looks nice, for example, wood, chalkboard, and its placement could be regulated better. And then you could continue to disallow things like the wavy man and the balloon and flag signs and things like that. Size of construction signs, again, some of these issues are going to go away because they're regulated by content when we get into the Reed versus Gilbert things. But construction signs, for example, 100 square feet is allowed in the Broadway district. So that's why we have that giant Tresta sign, or did have that. And then real estate signs, I think the duration of some of them, you're allowed to keep a real estate sign up until, I think, 7 days until the lease is accomplished or something. Until there's no more spaces available for lease in the building, you're allowed to have the real estate sign up. So we have a few instances where it's just perpetual. The sign is up nonstop and it doesn't have any sort of material standards. It's just a plywood sign staked up. The height and form of landscape ground signs has been an issue that's come up before. We keep it regulated to the 5 feet. There was discussion a couple years ago about potentially allowing that to go to 6 feet with different instances or form about the landscaping in the base of the sign. We might want to discuss how we can address murals. There are a couple on Northern Monona Drive. We had a city organized mural come before the commission with no real guidance from the ordinance about how we can have any input on that.
And you have a general public art ordinance?
We do not.
Okay.
Off-premise advertising, there's a section, I think, in the commercial district table that allows off-premise advertising signs, but I'm not sure why we would ever allow that, so just something to be cleaned up. We can clarify things like how window signs are measured. Verizon, at one point, for example, had all of their window signs plastered with advertisements, and I think the idea of the window sign regulations are to keep those to a tasteful minimum. You still allow clear see-through glass, so you're not effectively creating another wall of advertising. But how do you measure that? Is it 50% per window pane, 50% of the facade?
So part of my question is, you can tell me that we can't have portable billboards on the drive, but we have them now. And so it's the issue of enforcement. We need to pay attention to that because I don't think you have time to run around and issue tickets.
Right, I think we can clean up a lot of that.
So it is, how do we, if someone violates it, can you send them a letter or can we do something about it or can we change something? Because it doesn't make sense to have, particularly on the portable signs, to have rules and regulations, but you can't enforce them, and so if you don't pay attention to it, you can get away with it.
Right.
And there was a Wisconsin Supreme Court case, the rats and cats case.
Rats and cats?
About enforcement, right? There was a strike, and there were outside employees hired by the company, so the union put up a big inflatable rat. The company put up a big inflatable cat. and the city neglected to enforce its code about big inflatable signs. And the decision said, if you have the rules, you have to enforce them.
Yes.
So we need to pay attention to that.
Yes, good point.
You talk about not enforcing stuff. I'm not sure if generally people are aware of the amount of ground signs that go up in Monona that do not come through here. I mean, I could name a dozen of them. I mean, just off the top of my head. They're going up constantly, and You know, I don't know if it's an issue. I'm not really passing judgment on it one way or the other, but I'm just telling you that they're going up constantly.
Ground sign meaning.
Ground signs like the ones that come before this committee. except
Permanent ones.
Permanent ground signs.
Okay.
Integrity Auto, gee, I think they were in the news last week for something, but that's down on Femrite Drive. I mean, Dean left and Integrity moved in and they put a new sign up. There's signs across the street from my business that never came through here. I mean, they're going
Some
up
things go
constantly.
through staff, don't they?
Constantly.
Metal signs go through.
Sunny, can you speak to
Yeah, I mean,
signs in
I think there
general?
are some that go up, especially in those areas that you mentioned where people aren't necessarily, they're not heavily trafficked, and they just go up and then they're there for years and we lose track of them. But one point that's sort of similar that we can clarify in the code is when you're just replacing the face of a sign, when a permit is specifically required, whether it's an alteration for just the face of the sign, or if we're only dealing with brand newly constructed ground signs.
Well, I was just, when you look at the sandwich boards, that type of sign, I would hope part of the discussion would be whether we want to say those aren't allowed. I mean, I think there's a good reason to allow them, so I hope the discussion is broader than just we need to enforce it or not enforce it, whatever. That was all.
Right. Chris?
So could I request of the chair that we have a standing item on our agenda every meeting to discuss the sign code revisions? Because Mike doesn't have to come back all the time, but if at the subcommittee we're talking about things, it'd be nice for either Sonia or one of us to have a report on what we're talking about and get input from the rest of the commission. So if there's something like sandwich boards, the whole commission can weigh in on it and we say, hey, we're talking about sandwich boards, here's what's going on, what do you think? If we have a standing item on this agenda, we don't have to talk about it, but then it allows us to have that discussion.
Makes sense to me.
It's good,
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One more example that's come up a lot is related to content, but we have something in our code that says taglines are not allowed, or secondary messages. A good example of this was a restaurant wanted to come in, they have the main restaurant name and then a second line that says best taste in town. Or there might be some sort of secondary advertising message like burgers $1 or something like that.
Unconstitutional.
Yes. I think it's right. But similarly too, information that's not business identification, like phone numbers, email addresses, websites, how can we deal with those?
Right, so most new sign codes say if you want to display those, they count towards the sign area.
So we can't disallow it. And our issue always here has been safety, because if you put too much information on a sign, the drivers are focusing on that sign and not on driving. And that's an issue.
Right.
But we can't do anything about it. Okay.
So the amount of content, size, lettering, readability, all of that is off the table.
Yeah, I
Or
think,
on the sign.
I think now you can regulate sign materials. You can regulate sign placement, and you could prohibit certain unnatural man-made colors from an historic district. We'd have to identify those colors by their Pantone identification number, rather than leave it up to the eye of the zoning administrator. But otherwise, content and design of signage that is approved by regulated by the ordinance rather than by, say, a special process like a plan development process, our hands are tied. This was not necessarily a good decision, I think, in terms of the objectives of a typical city.
Was there mention, I know when we've had some of our digital message boards, we've had other pieces that we've wanted to add in there, or if these become a concern when it comes to misinterpreting it as a
Right, so
traffic
you
control.
can regulate whether signs change their appearance, whether it's chasing lights, changing message, full video, flashing, change the colors. You can regulate the length of the transition. So those issues related to a changing image, we do have the ability to regulate.
And we have a couple examples of electronic message signs in Monona that they're generally prohibited in all districts, but special exceptions were made for a few examples, one being the city of Monona. So
Mhm.
can we break our own rules?
Because we're special.
Yeah, you
Yep.
can do that still.
Excellent, all right. And then the other was for the high school. So that's granting a special exception based on the speaker. I don't think that's generally advisable.
It would
but
be
there might
better
be-
to base it on the zoning district
Mhm.
or an overlay district rather than the speaker.
All right. Other questions or comments?
I have one more. The school district, for example, would be in a certain zoning district, but the uses, here's a better example. So on Monona Drive, it's all zoned retail business.
Yes.
And there are single-family homes that are grandfathered.
So we could base it not only on the zoning district, but we could base it on the land use type. We can make those distinctions. Like government land uses or public parks. You know, we could get very narrow with the type of land use that we're carving out for being treated differently.
Be important to us.
All right, others? All right, and, so Dale, I can't remember when your last meeting is anticipated.
I was told that it was the next meeting was my last.
We'll make sure that we have
By
signed.
staff.
And Dale was part of our subgroup, and so one question is for this group is to see if there's someone else that would be interested in serving on that subgroup. So if I remember right, we have Kathy and Chris, and it was Dale. Dale can still throw his 2 cents in, I'm sure.
Just for clarification, I didn't kick Dale off.
No.
Dale's term has expired and he's chosen to go other avenues.
Are there others that may have a consideration? I see Kathy about ready to speak.
Oh, are you looking at me?
Yes, I am.
I thought we had mentioned before. I probably could, and I guess I'd be interested. It'd be probably another learning curve for me, but at this, sorry, I feel like I'm getting up to speed on it. So if you feel like you need another person, yeah.
That'd be great. Is there anybody else that is
Unless-
interested?
unless
Everybody will
you're
give a
like-
kick
I
at
thought you were
things.
perfectly well.
On a standing agenda item every 2 weeks here to be able to chime in, and it'll come back here. We just need a group to do some of the early lifting to bring some of the items here. Kathy?
I was going to say, one of the reasons I think Susan would be good, Chris and I, have been around, and sometimes you get jaded when you think of it, and she brings a whole new perspective because she's not as familiar with.
She's not jaded.
We'll see, I guess. That's what it sounds like.
So it's a good balance,
That's how
I
I
think.
take it.
Will,
We can jade her.
will this result in there not being a need for signs to come before Plan Commission? I mean, it doesn't sound like, if the code is put together properly, what would they be coming here for? I mean, I'm one that questions what they come here for already.
Location.
So, yeah, location is something that you still may want to weigh in on. And I would say that in the communities that have adopted these new codes, that would be the main item of discussion.
So there might be fewer that would need to come here, but there may still need to be some.
I think we have the ability to customize those implications as you see fit. But in terms of really regulating the appearance of signs, the sign face itself, typically those kind of aesthetic powers that local governments have enjoyed are no longer as readily available to us.
What about landscape ground signs? Do we still get to look at the landscaping, or?
You do. You get to look at the wall materials behind the wall signs.
So we do. So we'll look at base materials and landscaping.
Or you can prohibit some materials for signs, for example. But it's not like the good old days.
We're certainly not going to review them like we have in the past.
Yeah. Be interesting. All right. Thank you very much.
Nice to
Look
see you
forward
all.
to it.
Thanks.
All right. So we'll go on to item 7, which is reports of staff and commission members. This is staff report regarding the status of development project proposals. Upcoming meetings, April 9th is a tentative date, and the 23rd is a cancellation. May 14th, we believe to be on.
Yep, April 9th, I don't have any applications as of today. Today's the deadline, so it looks like that will be canceled. April 23rd, I'm out of town, so that's already canceled. For the 14th, we are anticipating the hotel plans for the riverfront to come back for final approval. And the Landmarks Commission would like to get their final ordinance changes in front of you for approval at the next opportunity, so that would also be May 14th. The last item I have on there is a potential item. If anybody has any comments, I planned on bringing the streetscape design for the riverfront for Metropolitan Lane and the new connector street, so the 2 interior roads through the new development, bringing that streetscape here for Plan Commission input. It's not something that we ever typically do because we don't have new roads or urban streets, but the Plan Commission, I believe, was heavily involved, at least via the ad hoc committee in the Monona Drive reconstruction, and we'd have the opportunity to comment on things like decorative lighting, pavement types, how the terrace is laid out with plantings or stormwater basins or things like that. Okay, good.
All right. B, our request for information. All right. And 8 is adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned.